Hey guys, you made it. Congratulations. This is part 8 of the series. And in this series, as you can immediately see, we have a different image but from the same series. And what I wanted to show you in this episode was several things, really cool stuff. I wanted to show you that you can match, especially if it's a more complex image, how you can match the colors and tones more accurately, and also how to apply a lot of the things I was showing in the previous episodes on a more complex image in a different context. Hopefully that will expand your horizon and help your learning. Also, we didn't talk about color correction. I left that for the end because there are some things you need to know before that, like masking and things I talked about earlier. So let's cover that as well. By the way, my name is Krunoslav Stifter and welcome to my blog, or if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, I would appreciate a thumbs up if you like these kind of videos. If you think this is something worth sharing, please do, because the more people see this, the more I'll be able to make new videos. And of course, if you would like to receive more of this, please subscribe. And of course, I will always appreciate comments and questions, so that this is not just me making videos, but there is some interaction between us. So if you have questions or if you have feedback that you want to provide, I would highly appreciate that. Thank you. So let's get started. At the beginning of this series, I showed you these three images shot from the same photographers, same models, same setting, everything. I showed you that I told you that we will be retouching at least one of them, and then also I would be showing you how you can match the colors and tones and everything between them using 3 different programs. And I'll get to all that, but for now, for this video, I wanted to show you 2 things. One is that this image is the one we're working on, and we wanted to kind of be inspired by the Gucci ads, if you remember. And the idea was to maybe not copy paste everything, but definitely make something really similar to that, using the same principles in terms of color harmony and relationship between the colors. And of course, Gucci ads, I mean, they're all different they have slightly different colors, sometimes more yellow, more reddish, depending on your sources, because they're all found online. So we used that to make this image a finished product, and then I did another image where I used the same principles to make it look very similar, to make it look like it's a part of that series. But this is a bit more complex project, and I really think that's good because it will allow me to show you more complex problems. So let's get started. First things first. I showed you multiple raw conversions in the previous episodes. If you haven't seen them, I'll link them down below. I also showed you cleanup and retouching, of course, and we reached this point of color correction. That's the only thing I didn't cover in detail yet. But that's because, well, the other day somebody asked me, how would you change the color? How do I change the color of the sky from more blue to more green? And I wasn't sure what to tell this person, because if you Google how do I change the color of the sky, it is so simple to find that information, and just you can play around with sliders and you can do that, right? So if that's the sum of your ambitions to ask that kind of question, then maybe retouching isn't for you. Do some bungee jumping or something. But the easiest part about Photoshop is that we can use a bunch of tools to do some simple tasks, like changing color, for example. That's the basic of the basics. In fact, let me show you. I showed you how masking works, right? And that's because it's more complex and more important. But once you know how the mask works, you can do just about anything. So if you remember from the previous episodes, our mannequin doll, our test subject, well, I'm going to use the selection here of the mannequin, and I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. This time let's make it curves. And let's say I want to change the color of the mannequin into something more along the lines of yellow reddish color, maybe orange or something like that, right? Well, I'll go to my blue channel, I'll pull it down a bit. I'll go to my green channel, I'll pull it on down a bit, and on the red I'll add a bit of red. Or maybe, yeah, just if that's not enough, I can always add a bit more. And here we are, we got the color I wanted, right? But now I'm going to use the same selection, but this time I'm going to use another tool. This time I'm going to use color balance. I'm going to use the same kind of approach with sliders, to get the color I want. So that's second method to do the same thing, just moving sliders around. I'm going to use the third method. For example, I could use hue saturation in this case because we don't have anything really complex. So I'll click on colorize, change it to the color I want, add a little bit of saturation, and then we go. That's a third method I can use to show you the same thing. Now I'm going to use selective color. I'm going to go to neutrals maybe and play around with sliders. Even if I don't know what they do, I can always figure it out, right? Oh, here we go. I got the same effect. And I could go on and I could show you with other tools on how to do this. So how do I change the color of something? That's really not the question you should be asking. And there's about 1,000 tutorials online on how to use curves, how to use all these selective color and all these adjustment tools. And if you don't know how to find the tutorials, it's so easy to open one up and play with sliders. So how do you change something? That's really the lowest of the low skill. And it shouldn't be something you should be asking others, really. So what's the next question? Well, if I go back to my image, remember the other question was masking, because in this case I can't use one tool to change the color of everything within the image the way I want it, right? So if you came to me and asked me, well, I know how to change the color of the sky to another color, but if I do that, oftentimes I change something else which I don't want. How would I restrict what I'm changing and what I'm not changing? Well, that's where you would use masks. So that's a more complex question you could ask. Okay, masks. I showed you, I believe in part 5 of this series, how masking works and how I mask this image. And for example, here I have a mask of this area of the sea, and then I use the hue saturation to move sliders around to change just the color of that area, right? So that would be a more complex way to do it, using masks. But then on top of that, what about the color harmonies and the relationship between the colors? So I know how, but what about when, what, and why? Well, in part 2 of this series, I think it's part 2, I briefly gave you an introduction into color harmonies and color theory, and I also showed you on the Gucci images we analyzed in that Cooler application how the relationship is between the colors. So hopefully by understanding that, you're better at understanding why warm and cold tones are complementary and they work well inside of an image, and that's why we changed the image to look this way. Now this is more of for tutorial purposes, you know, I could have made it a different color, but we wanted to make it more like a Gucci ad because that's a popular question. But you see where I'm getting with this? So there's a hierarchy of important questions to ask, and how is at the bottom of the list. Why should always come before the how. When you know the whys, the how becomes easy. So focus more on that. Now of course, color theory and color harmony is it's a big topic, and it's not the easiest one to learn. So I would probably go in some future or somewhere, especially if there's demand for it, and talk about it more. And I will briefly talk about it in this series as well. But it is something that once you understand that, then the how of using these tools becomes something that everybody knows how to do. But changing the colors to match in terms of color harmonies and all that, that's a bit more difficult. So one could say that on the market, the easiest probably part would be the cleanup. So if I go and open up my cleanup stuff, right, just removing stuff. Now you can be an assistant for somebody and do that. That's probably the lowest paid part of the job and the easiest one to do. Then comes dodging and burning. That's a bit more difficult, but it's still a lot of people know how to do it. And of course then comes the masking, which also a lot of people do, and you know, you can even get it really cheaply. Like people in India are charging, you know, very small amount of money, where you can outsource them to mask your image basically using pads and stuff. So if those are your skills that you want to learn and you know how to do, and that's some of your ambition, it's going to be very difficult for you to offer something of value to the market. Because the easier it is to copy what you can do, less valuable you become by definition. In other words, if you want to be replaceable, as Coco Chanel says, right, in order to be replaceable, one must always be different. You have to know more than your neighbor, than your competition. So how to change the color of the sky is really not that valuable on the market, because many people know that. How the colors work with each other to create an image that's compelling to the eye, that's much more valuable. But on top of that, how do you combine all of these techniques to properly make judgments about retouching? The whys, when, and where. Those are very important questions. How is something you of course need to know, but it is not as valuable. In fact, pretty soon robots will know how, but you will still have to tell them when and where and why. So let's examine how we can use this set of tools, this set of things, and also stuff I talked about in the previous episodes, the masking, the cleaning and healing and all that, and how we can use that in another image. So this time it's going to be a little bit different because the image is a bit more complex. And I think that's where your ability to understand what I was showing really comes in handy. How can you take what I've been showing and apply it to a different context? That shows understanding. But if you move the slider because you saw me move the slider, that's not valuable. Nobody's going to pay you for that very much. So let's take a look. Alright, now let's talk about workflow, techniques, judgment, principles. Alright, so techniques are all about how to do something. And by themselves, they're useful, but not that useful. When you can string them together and make them work with one another, that's where it becomes really good. So workflow is all about in what order do you apply those techniques, one after another, so that you eventually get a very efficient workflow that allows you to do your job better and easier. Now, then there's also a judgment, and a judgment is all about why, when, and where. And the sound judgment follows established principles like color harmony, principles of composition, and so on. So you can learn this either by academic ways, by learning from others, or by your trial and error, or both. But you have to learn that. And it is always better to first learn the principles. In other words, a fundamental, primary, or general law or truth for which others are derived. For example, principles of color theory, or if you're not good with that, principles of modern physics like law of gravity, right? Those are the things that govern whether or not something will be effective. But in order to apply this is just theory. So in order to apply this in real world, we also need techniques, right? Because a technique is a practical method, skill, or art applied to a particular task. Essentially any method used to accomplish something. But if you know only the technique and not the underlying principle, then when a new image shows up, you're going to be lost. But if you understand what governs the effectiveness of those techniques by understanding the principles, when, where, and why, and all that, then you can adapt to any situation. And that's the key for you to be more valuable as a retoucher and deliver better work and adapt to new situations. So let's take a look on another image, how these principles and technique combine work together. Alright, so let's take a look at this image and let's see how the principles I showed you in the previous episodes and the techniques I showed you in the previous episodes both together allow us to retouch virtually any image. Now on top of that, I will also show you through this video now that by understanding the principles, I can modify the techniques to fit this image, because the same techniques may not work. It's a different image, different context, so I need to be able to be flexible, to be able to adapt to new situations, right? So by understanding the principles of how the tools work, understanding the principles of why I need to do something within the image, make it darker, lighter, more saturated, less saturated, by understanding those things, then I can modify the tools or use the right tool for the job. And I think that's how you develop the proper judgment, by focusing on those things, right? So here we have layer groups with layers inside them, just like you would in the previous image I showed you. But there's one more group. Here we have 3, Here we have 4. So what's with the 4 group? Let's take a look. Let me open up the multiple row conversion group. I will click on the last eyeball icon and choose show hide all other layers. And this will allow me to now show you step by step what I did. So first, row conversion for shadows. We know why I did that, right? Because I needed certain elements of the image to be dark. But it's very difficult within the camera raw interface to selectively make other parts brighter. It is much easier to do this with multiple row conversions within Photoshop using masking. So I already explained that for the previous image. Now the second one was for midtones, because that's where the most of the image I want it to be. And if I click on the mask, you can see how it looks. By the way, I also made a selection of the couple of the models, and this is just like I showed you with masking in the part 5 of the series, I believe. So you know how I did that. Then I also created one for the highlights, where I just paint the highlights. And this is all done from raws. Now you know how I did that, why I did that, because I explained in previous videos. But as you can see, when I got to this point, unlike before, here I have a more complex situation. Here I have a model which has different skin complexion, and also possibly the light bounces off of the sand or something, who knows what. And she is more yellow, especially in this area, in her skin, than the male model. So by having two different skin tones, it sort of doesn't match as well if we had one skin tone for both models. If this was a Caucasian and African American or black and white person or something like that, then it would make more sense, right? Because there is a dynamic between them, the polarity. Here it would be better if they look the same. And the other thing why I want to do that is because if I can make the entire image at this stage have even tones and colors, then later I can selectively just attack certain elements of the image. And here the image decides for me what is more saturated, what is more of a different color. And I don't want that. I want to be able to control what I'm doing with the image. So first year step would be to neutralize the colors, to make it more even throughout the image. And this is something that it would be possible to do with raw conversion, but it would be a lot of work. Therefore, I have created a new group called Evening of Colors and Tones. So the principle I just explained. Now how I did it? Well, again, I created an adjustment layer. In this case it was selective color. I went to yellows and reds, moved the sliders around, and I wanted to affect only one part of the image. Therefore masking comes in handy, like I showed you before, and I attacked only her torso and the bottom part here. So if I activate that one, you can see on the image, right, it goes from much yellow to more like his skin tones. Then I have one where I desaturated the image pretty much globally, and the reason for this was that I thought that the image were a bit too saturated, which is not bad, but I wanted to decide when and what is going to be saturated, not the image. So first I'm going to reduce it. Later, if I want to, I can selectively enhance it. That's the difference. Then I have one layer here which is a new thing, new technique, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to make them a little bit darker. And I could use masks for this, but I decided to go with one of my techniques, and that is using a black and white adjustment layer. Now black and white adjustment layer, when you first create it, does this to your image. And then you have, of course, different sliders to affect different colors within the image. Well, by applying the black and white adjustment layer and setting it to luminosity blend mode, now I'm affecting only the tones within the image, not the colors. So if I move one of these sliders, I can affect just those colors within the image. Now this is not the best method sometimes to work, because it can be destructive. You know, you can kind of move more of the blue than cyan and you create banding, so be careful. I just wanted to do it a little bit, see, not that much. And of course his leg was a bit too dark, so I didn't want to apply additional darkness to the leg, so I protected that with just a few strokes of brush and to kind of mask that out. And the last thing I did was, if you look at these areas, he is a little bit more magenta than she is, so I used curves and some masking and the curves are very simple. I went to blue and I just added a bit of yellow to his skin. So if you look at the mask, right, pretty straightforward. Of course, I already have a mask which I showed you how I did those, where I selected the models beforehand, so it's easy to apply this. And this is almost now at this stage like I have created one raw conversion perfectly. But if I couldn't, I had to use multiple of them and then merge them like you see here. Now comes the cleaning part, or should I say cleanup part. Of course, I already showed you how I do my cleanups, and what would be the principle behind cleaning up? Well, remove all the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. Remember that rule? Well, let's take a look. What are some of the elements in this image that distract from the compelling part of the image, which is the model? Especially not just the two models, but this side of the image particularly. Well, there is this parts, there's these elements within the sand. It would be nice to not have them because they're not competing then with attention for the model, for the both models. Then there are certain elements within the image, like these stuck grains of sand inside the hair. And if I remove those, they might not look much, but you have everything dark and then you have a few specks of white. Well, they don't contribute to the quality of the image. They're not essential to enjoying the image, right? They may be authentic, but they're not essential to the aesthetic of the image. However, they are a distraction, therefore remove them. And there are certain elements, a blemish here, a blemish there, things like that, right? So here's my multiple blank layers combined after cloning and healing. Look at the image. So this is before, after, before, after, before, after, right? So all I did here was remove this kind of sand busy foreground. There was another element here which I thought was probably distracting, so it might as well not be here. It doesn't serve a particular purpose. And there were elements within the image, like this area here. It doesn't make image any better, but what it does, it's a white small thing here, so it kind of draws your attention, right? Take it away. Things like in the hair, right? Just reducing some of those elements, some perhaps stray away hairs, things like that. Nothing too much. Then I did another blank layer, and this time I think I tagged the leg a little bit. I was starting to get some really weird stuff. I think he even has a scar over his knee here, so that's something I kind of cloned and healed. Then I applied some digital shaving because this looks authentic, but I wonder if it could be better, right? So I just gave him a little bit of shave, make it a bit more cleaner. It's still kind of rugged and manly, but not that rugged and manly. It's tidier while still being rugged. And the last thing I did was, well, I thought about the hair, right? And I figured, well, the way it is now, the eye wants to follow this nice little curvature, and it kind of follows the muscles here and comes here, and then instead of following the hair like this, like a circle, right, it kind of has these edges, same as here. So what if I change that? And this is what I did. I kind of reshaped that, made it a bit more aesthetically pleasing, if you will. Now the way I did that was, let me show you, I merged everything to its own new layer, so that will be Control Shift Alt and E, or Command Shift Option and E. This makes it a new layer, everything visible. And then I basically just went to Filter and Liquify. And then here, of course, in the Liquify, I would usually use pressure and density at a small pace, so I can start shaping this. And then that's how I would reshape his hair. So once I was done, I could click OK, And then when I was done with that, I deleted everything but the area around the hair. And I did the same thing for her because I felt that it would be better to look in this shape. It just kind of follows her head a little bit better, more aesthetically pleasing. And then of course there was the area around her head, her ear here, and this shadow. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we kind of fix that? So in order to redo the ear, to kind of reconstruct the ear, well, he's human too, right? So I could borrow this here, and that's what I did. So here's what I did. I basically merged again everything to its own new layer. I selected this ear, Control or Command J to make it a new layer, right? Then Control or Command T to retransform, right click on it and flip horizontal and place it here and just mask it out. And here we go, we have another ear. So that's how I would fix that element. And then on top of that, so we have just now reconstructed. I mean, if I showed you before and after, right, we have reconstructed certain elements, remove others, and we have made image still retain its original two players, two subjects. We didn't change them in any significant way. What we did is we simplified the image, right? Remember the rule: remove all the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. Now, by removing all the stuff that wasn't really necessary, now the main actors here, are able to perform much better on screen. And by doing the cloning and healing, we were able to remove a lot of the stuff, but not all of it. We also wanted to use dodging and burning, so let me show you that. Alright, before we continue and start talking about dodging and burning, leave a comment please. Do you understand up until this point, and can you follow along? Am I going too fast, or have you, especially if you watch the other episodes, I think that a lot of this will be even repetitive. But I think that's the important element, right? Because we need to establish those ground rules that will help us adjust our approach to different images, not just one image. How do I retouch one image? But how do I learn how to retouch any image? It's the story about fishing, right? Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And this is the same principle. So hopefully you are appreciating my teaching you fishing rather than giving you a fish. So let's start off now talking about dodging and burning, because in order to fix certain things in this image, I use cloning and healing. To fix other things in the image, I use dodging and burning. Now, of course, I talked about both of these techniques in detail in previous episodes, but I'll just show you how they allow me to fix this image. Now, one thing I perhaps didn't explain well enough or thorough enough, I'll repeat it again. Remember our mannequin doll? Well, if I zoom in here really into it. Now, of course, this was a plastic doll, obviously, but in order to simulate an actual person, now actual person, of course, we all have pores, which usually we want to retain those detail inside the skin, those perfect pores. And I'll simulate that by adding some noise to this. But then on top of that, every one of us, if you remember, has some darker patches inside the skin. It's just being human, some more than others. And if you ever work with split frequency, or if you know what that is, think of this as three different layers, three different frequencies of detail. So we have our perfect skin, right, which is just perfect skin in terms of every pore is visible, everything is perfect. And then we have a bit bigger elements within, a big bigger details, and another frequency, and this is just a frequency of badder detail, stuff we don't want. And then we have just the one which we in frequency separation usually refer to as low frequency, and this is just the shadows and highlights, right? And this will be, of course, if I deactivate this one for a moment, that will be just her shadows and highlights. That will be just this, right? That explains where her cheek is and then where it ends, where it begins. like mountains. Those things are what makes her recognizable human. What gives her nice details and nice texture are the perfect pores, but the stuff in between, all that junk, is what we don't want, because it kind of ruins the concept of beauty and clean retouching. So we want to remove that. But of course, if you clone and heal, you also clone and heal different skin texture and everything. And sometimes you can get away with that, sometimes you can't. But dodging and burning is brilliant because it allows you to remove just the layer in between, the frequency of this kind of the detail that we don't want, right? So if I go to our image, and let me show you my dodging and burning layer so you'll get a sense of what I mean. So this is their area of, where it looks pretty decent, but it could be a lot better. So this is my dodging and burning. Now what you're able to see is that we have retained all that nice pores and texture. Here it's barely visible as pores, more like a noise or film grain, because it's the kind of image we have, but it still kind of can be understood as pores, right? So we had that, and we have this really big shadows and highlights which define their facial structure. So in between that we have all this junk. You see all these darker patches and stuff. We want to remove that, right? So that will be just like these elements, and we want to remove that. Now to better see what we're doing, I'll create my temporary layer, and basically what this is just one hue saturation layer where I desaturate everything, and one curve layer where I just added a bit of contrast. This now allows me to remove the color, which could be a distraction for the purposes of dodging and burning, and allows me to see all those darker patches inside the skin. You can see them here clearly, right? These darker patches. Now I want to remove them to retain the underlying texture, while at the same time retaining the overall bone structure and everything that we have that makes them recognizable as human beings. So in order to do that, I'm going to use dodging and burning, and this is what I got, right? Isn't that pretty good for a dodging and burning? And of course, okay, let me deactivate my mask. This is how it looks. I did this across the image. Mostly precisely I did it in the area where people will focus more, and that's in the areas where their faces are, and the rest of it I did kind of more globally, and I combine all of that in order to create a very nice looking dodging and burning. But then I went too far in certain elements, and because I have a mask to it, I just mask out certain parts of the image. Combining those two, and this is something I showed you in the previous episode, so I won't go into detail, but this is before and after, before and after. And if I deactivate my temporary layer, you can see now before and after, before and after, before and after. Or if I zoom in like so, before and after, before and after, just dodging and burning. I really love how it does that. But then again, we also have certain elements within the skin which have different color, from fingernails to everything else. Like his nose is a bit red here. That's why I would use the color layer, and I explain how that works as well. So if I activate that one, you can see how it fixed the color in the nose, and also how it can fix the fingernails, right, and other elements. So that's how I would use my dodging and cleanup and dodging and burning. So this was before. A lot of stuff going on in this image. Not a lot of it really helps focusing on the model, one or the other. And then when you clean that out, remove all the unnecessary so that the necessary may live, right? We're like magicians. It's about misdirection. Whether using light or removing elements, you're saying, okay, don't look at the sand, look at their faces. And if you have a lot of stuff in the sand, it's harder to make that argument, right? So remove all that is unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. And here we are. one more time with all the cleanup and dodging and burning for the face, because that's the most important part where we should spend more time in this case. So this was before, this is after, before and after, right? And if I deactivate everything, before and after, how much more cleaner does the image look, which is now reduced to just the most important crucial components. It's no longer a mess of little detail competing all for attention. It is simplified, and I think that's what retouching should be about. But then of course we also have to add some color correction, because the way the image is now, we wanted to make it look like this, which in return looks similar to some of the Gucci images, right? So the way this image looks, we need to kind of make it look similar in this case. Now, if this was a simpler image where you would have maybe just one or two adjustments and you would adjust the image globally, this wouldn't be much of a problem. But when you need to make very selective edits like we do using masking and adjustments, then a lot of times it's about partly eyeballing things, having a good eye and comparing one image to the other. And the other element could be that you take one of these and you just drag and drop the adjustment layer to the other tab, and then you kind of copied the same adjustments, and then you just modify the mask to fit the new image. So here's what I did. I actually had to make more adjustments because the image was a little bit more complex, if you will. So first thing I did was, well, this sand, if you look at it here right away, the way it is now in this image is very much brighter and less saturated. So I made a mask just for the sand. I added some hue saturation layer, and I just reduced a little bit of that saturation. The second one I did was using the same mask for the lower part and a little bit here in between the model, this skyline here. And I use curves for this. Sorry. And I use curves for this, and I just kind of added a bit more brightness, right? So here's how it looks. If you look at the image, right, it made the sand brighter and it made that skyline brighter. This gives it a bit more dimension inside the image, because the skyline here is also kind of brighter. Then I added one curves layer, but this one protects the model and protects the foreground and affects only the ocean and the skyline. And you can see what it does, because I was lacking some contrast, so I added contrast, not with clarity or something like that, because that would have to I would have to merge everything to its own layer, but rather with an adjustment layer. And if you look at the original, there's also some contrast here. So by adding contrast like this, I've made the image pop a bit, made it more contrasty overall. But it's very selective, as you can see. Then I added another one, and this was hue saturation for just the skyline. If I show you the mask, just a loosely painted mask, right? I'm trying to get this kind of skyline, which is a bit more desaturated. Then I made one for another curves layer, and this is where I just kind of added a little bit more contrast to make those separations between highlights and shadows a bit more distinct. And the way it looks, you can see. Again, the leg was already a bit too dark, so I didn't want to darken that. And there are some other elements which I protected with the mask, like the shadow area beneath them. So, boom. Just adds a little bit more punch. And then I made another one. This one was for the color, and mainly towards the model, because in this image the model has a more yellowish skin, more orange. So I used the curves layer here to do the same thing. Just made a mask, and the mask is something I already have. If you remember, I made it at the beginning, and then I just reused that mask with the curves adjustment layer, and here I went to individual channels and played around with them until I get a little bit more orange color. And the last one I did was for the entire image. I just kind of reduced that saturation a little bit to make it similar to this one. And that's it. If the sand is still too yellow here, so if I wanted to modify that, I could reuse one of my masks, right? This one, for example, all I have to do is Control or Command click on the mask, go to this one, which affects everything, and just fill that area with black. And there we go. Now it affects everything but that area. And that's how you would modify anything within the image. So let's take a look. Before and after, before and after, and this is with all the adjustments, right? So as you can see, here I can even add one layer if I wanted to affect just the skin tones, which in this case I don't think I want to, but if I wanted to, it's easy to do. And this is how I would apply the adjustments across the image. Now again, I'm following the same principle as I talked about in one of the previous episodes, which is, you know, the separation of the background and the foreground using color for composition, complementary colors in this case, just like what we had here. Actually, I think this last layer was originally deactivated. I think I could even delete that, and that I logged before and after. Yeah, looks more similar. So what we have now is these adjustment layers applied with masks, just like I showed you. We have a cleanup, which is done with dodging and burning, which I showed you. It's done with different blank layers and cloning and healing, which I showed you. And you can see my workflow here as well, how they always kind of add up. And the only thing that was different was evening out the color and tones, but in reality this is just another step to change my workflow depending on the need, but at the same time it's just adjustment layers with masks, and I showed you how that works. So there's no mystery here, everything is just, you know, one for, like, this was multiple raw conversions, evening out of the colors and tones, cleanup and everything else, and color correction at the end. And boom boom boom, step by step, just using the same stuff I showed you in the previous episodes, and this is what you get, right? Pretty easy. Well, maybe not easy, but I mean, if you practice, you should have a better understanding of how to work. Now of course, if you had a different image, you might try to do this plus whatever you're using for your own workflow, but ultimately it's not that different. It's not going to be that different. Thank you for watching, and if you see any videos that you like on my channel, please give me a thumbs up, click the like button, you know, share it if you like with your friends, spread the word, leave a comment, give me some feedback so I can make better videos. And if you like to receive more videos that I upload and get a up-to-date state on my channel and the tutorials I make, please click on the subscribe button. And here's a really interesting thing I would also recommend. You see this little icon here, this little wheel? If you click on it, there's an option called Send Me Updates, and you click just Save. That way you will get updates to your directly to your inbox in your email, not just on the channel update, and you will never miss a video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.